You're listening to All Things 3D, where we talk about the world of fabricating, designing, and capturing in the third dimension.
Morning, everybody. Hi, this is Mike Balzer of All Things 3D, and this is Friday, 2nd of June. And a little discombobulated today. We had a last-minute snafu, and Chris will not be able to join us today, but I will march on and go ahead and start the show with our theme, which is 3D and climate change. As probably many of you know, and if you saw the 360 video that just played, one of the things that happened this week is President Trump decided not to sign the Paris Accord that supposedly, other than two other countries, was a what would you call it? An accord that brought all countries together to do something about climate change. Now, I don't know your particular feelings towards that, but I'm a little concerned with it. And as you know, Chris and I have covered 3D fabrication for about 3 years now, and we've talked about this in the past. And I have been a big proponent of using PLA, which is a cornstarch-based 3D material that I have one that has some fairly high strengths. But, the thing to kind of keep in mind is, can personal 3D fabrication or 3D printing in general help us in our climate changes? So I found this great article on engineering.com that kind of goes over a number of things. This was done out in September of 2016. And so one of the things that is identified is that a lot of the industrial movement created issues as smokestacks, poison waters, floating garbage islands. You've seen a lot of these images before. And can we, by narrowing the fabrication process, actually improve this? And so some of the things that they bring up is additive versus subtractive. We've talked about a number of times, since subtractive is mainly using CNCs to cut away material, there's an extreme number of a lot of waste. However, that can be somewhat of a misnomer, especially working with metals. You can then remelt the scraps and then reutilize them again. But some of the other points that are made is even with sintering, you may have some issues with external powder and things of that nature. But again, that can be recycled. So here they talk about the life cycle bracket energy consumption or CO2 emissions. And they go through there and they do a really good job of identifying the specific nature of these items. Also, the fact is, as we've talked about, when you can design a product using 3D fabrication, you can do certain things that can't be done through standard injection molding and other fabrication techniques. And so they bring this up as well, is that we can have some efficiencies by designing specifically for a component specifically for certain efficiency interest. So the other thing is distributed manufacturing, where instead of creating a process that creates lots of products, we do just-in-time printing, where we only provide fabrication specifically for a particular area. And I think that is extremely important as well. And we can isolate the manufacturing specifically to a particular need and no more than that. And then as you identify here, closed loop production, for instance, the recycling that I just mentioned, they say that even though we have some materials right now, including the PLA that I just mentioned earlier, we don't go far enough. Supposedly China does a better job of identifying different components and materials. We need to move further into that area as well and also do the same thing. And this article does a good job of identifying this as well. And then they bring in some of the obstacles. And one of the things that was pointed out is, the MakerBot's Thingiverse, which, most of us who have done some 3D fabrication are aware of, was a good start and a good direction. However, the problems is that when they were bought out by Stratasys, they became more isolated and more confined and more proprietary, and that kind of imploded or prevented the sharing, and as identified, the maker community kind of closed in on itself. Now, that's not saying the RepRap community has not stepped up, and then we also have Imagine from Ultimaker, who does a better job of providing a more public forum, and which is the one that I use for putting some of my prints and so forth. So in saying that, it is still a very uneven playing field right now. However, there is work going into it and a lot of efforts to move it forward. So if you are 3D fabricating, you might want to take a look at this article and some other research. When Chris comes back, we'll revisit this, and obviously he probably has a lot to it. He's been, as I've mentioned before, an avid nature guy, so he's probably got his own feedback on this whole subject. So we'll wait till he comes back next week. So let's kind of move into the first item today, and that is a revisit to Nolo VR. We've covered them before, and I actually pre-ordered one. And surprisingly, one of the few items that appears to be shipping on time. In fact, they just shipped. I'm assuming, I haven't seen a shipping identification yet, but I did put in my address. But this update here says that they started shipping them. So hopefully I should see mine in a few weeks. Now, what makes this kind of interesting, if we go back and look at it, remember the Nolo VR, as you can see in this image here, essentially adds tracking devices, in this case to the GearVR, but I think you can use it with other headsets as well. And we can play the little video here. Well, as you can see, it's a Chinese company, but the the surprising thing, as you know, I've been an opponent of 6Sense for years now. They've actually not only exceeded and meted their stretch goal, but actually have a product that I think looks pretty nice. Now, obviously, you have to attach this to your uh, mobile VR unit, but I've requested some mechanical information on it, and I do plan to build a bracket process into the Uplay headset itself so that we can just attach it. But the point is it works essentially, as you can see, a headset marker, and then there's a base unit, and then the two controllers. They do show that the headset is wired. That could be a limitation, but I think it is also Bluetooth, requiring no wires. So pretty excited about that. As soon as I get it, I will make sure to provide a review. I'll look over the development kit over the weekend, but this is kind of an exciting unit, and I'm looking forward to seeing it soon. To actually provide you some ability, not only for hand controllers to take a little bit further than the Daydream controller or the new GearVR controller, but the ability to do 6 degrees of freedom at a very inexpensive price. In fact, if I remember correctly, I spent less than $100 on this for the early bird. So uh, looking forward to that. Okay, let's move on to the next item. So this was for Chris, and so I'll just go through it very quickly. If you have a Nintendo Switch, some people complain that it didn't have a true D-pad, so you could 3D fabricate a cover over the D-pad switches, as you can see here. So Chris, hopefully you take a look at the show notes and see what I put in there, and maybe you can tell us about this, or maybe you've made a cooler version that we can try out next week. All right, moving on to design. Let's look into the clothing fashion design area. Now, we've covered a number of items in the past about using 3D for fashion design, mainly in 3D fabrication, not the whole process. So 3ders.org and 3D printing industry have both written articles that talk about it. Now, I like 3Ders take on it because it looks at where the what do you call it, clothing industry is. You have designers, and then you have to basically farm it out to fabrication industries, and they talk about you have high output, low wages, and that this could possibly turn that around because the supply chain becomes more direct because you design as well as go directly to a 3D fabrication. What I thought was cool, and I will run over to, well, I don't know why. Did they remove it? Let's try. Sorry about that. So here it's 3D printing industries article on it, and they actually do a little bit more of identifying the actual product. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that their software, if you sign up for it. Now, this is a company out of Russia, but if you sign up for it, you can get their software for free. And essentially, they provide 3D models, and the 3D models then can be conformed to specific specifications of the user, and then you essentially apply a pattern or clothing to it as shown here. I've downloaded it. I will take a look at it over the next week and provide some more feedback on it. But I think that's a very cool idea, as you can see here, different things. And then from there, you essentially can 3D fabricate. I guess the tops here are 3D fabricated. I don't know about the pants themselves. So I don't know any more than that, but it looks like a very interesting idea, and could, might be a game changer in the 3D fabric market. I don't know. We'll see. All right, let's move on to the next item, 3D in medicine. We've talked about this subject a number of times now, but what I find notable is that I apologize. I'm not really, oh yeah, I guess I'm sorry about that. So essentially, we've got two items here. If you've had a chance to play with the HTC Vive, there's a little demo in their little VR lab that allows you to basically, as the guy's doing their slice uh, an anatomy structure and look at the internals. But I haven't really seen anything that's been applied specifically to that. Above that is what they call a visualization cave. They project an image, and then by wearing these funky little rabbit ears, it provides tracking as well as stereo imaging, so you can literally walk around the screen and the position would change. Much better for viewers who need to look at or group viewing versus a bunch of people wearing headsets. And then obviously the main point of this article is that's fine, creating 3D visualization through VR, but what do you do with it then? And then obviously here they show a 3D heart model simulation, and then actually using 3D modeling to visualize data, but then taking that to the next step and be able to actually print it. So, the article is in Forbes magazine. It's very basic. And obviously we've covered a number of items, and my goal is to take visualization to the next step in home remodeling, to apply these techniques before you actually have a contractor come out and make some changes. And it's already saved me some money, so I'm looking forward to bringing more into that area soon. Okay, let's move on to NASA. Essentially, we've covered Artec 3D scanners in the past, but in this case, I think this was also used to scan. They talk about using the Unreal Engine, but they're the ones that created that the ISA vision or demonstration VR simulation that you can download. But the important thing is, and then, obviously I felt that this was probably the case, but using a 3D scanner to scan the actual components, or actually even modeling them using the specifications and 3D drawings. They probably have the CAD files. So here they go. They basically talk about the scanning. Rather than painstakingly model these tools from physical measurements and photographs or working for textureless CAD files, they just scan them. So yes, I would have to agree to a certain extent that scanning an object and then bringing it in might be a faster workflow. But if you already have the CAD files, it's not much more to reskin it and apply it. But if you don't need, let's say if this is just something sitting on a shelf, it might be better just to scan it and have a low quality 3D model of it. Okay, so there you go. What do we got? Let's move on to, I have a little video here. You may have heard about this in the news. Yeah, I think the article is kind of interesting, but I'll play the video right now.
You ready to do this?
So who's gonna be captain?
I'm captain.
Wow. Hey guys.
Hello, everyone. We've established she's captain.
Okay, you're captain. I'll be tactical.
Captain, do you want me to add power to the engines?
Yeah, get engines ready, please. We're gonna warp to Gamma Hydra. Engage.
Oh no, whoa.
Bring us to a stop, please, Helm. In conflict, we will rescue these people.
I'm doing a scan right now.
Captain, Klingon ship decloaking. Red alert!
Shields up to 100%, Captain.
Fire phasers!
Fire phases now, Captain.
Tactical, armed torpedoes.
Arming them now.
Fire! Woo.
Okay, so let's move on to the next item. So as I mentioned, I was going to give more information on the Ambisonic Adobe Premiere plugin. And so as behind me, and hopefully I sound okay, but the first order Ambisonic plugin, this is from, I think we've covered this before, but essentially you can get this full library from, well, the links are available in the Google Notes, but essentially you can get this library, and basically if you download, here it goes, the Ambisonic plugin suite from Matthias Kronlochner. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly, but you can go ahead and get this, download it. They suggest only getting the first order because I guess that's basically the max capacity of the ability of channels that can be put out of Premiere, and I'll get into a minute how that works. So essentially, if you follow these instructions here, you download it, install it into this particular folder. Basically, you're installing some VST plugins, and then you download the binaural presets, and then create a folder in your app data roaming Ambix if you're using Windows. Here's your directory for OS X. And then download this Thrive directory. This creates the model that allows you to basically hear what your simulation will sound like in your headset. And then here are some instructions on actually setting it up within Premiere. Now, you can, I mean, this will be in the show notes, but what I had found, because I did this last night, I spent a lot of time experimenting with it. And sadly, I felt the results were somewhat iffy. One thing, the plugin didn't always show up, which was a problem. And importing your spatial audio, here we had some issues. You had to make sure that the Ambix rotator was available in the channels that you're working with. And then I found it very counterintuitive. You remember when I covered the Facebook spatialization tools, they gave you a nice full 360 as well as the ability to look at both above and below you as you set up your sound sources. That isn't the case in these for Adobe Premiere. However, the strengths with Adobe Premiere is that you can assimilate all of your video files as well as your audio files. And however, I feel that there were some issues with that. Now, what I found surprising, even though nobody has identified it, is that I could also see the Facebook spatializer plugins for VST, since it now does VST3. And so I may come back next week and try that out. But getting back to this, so once you set it up based upon this and you actually can see your plugins, you may have to open and close Adobe Premiere a couple of times. You then go through and you can use this little rotating if you actually have to offset your 360. One of the things that I noticed in doing my little clip, which was this one here, which I'll play again, is the sound was not centered. And for whatever reason, even though the microphone was centered when I was actually doing this, I found that the sound within the Premiere wasn't. And I'm still working on that actual offset so that it appears when I'm talking here that the sound is coming from me. Because most important in this particular video skit that I did, that if you watch this from the beginning, and sadly there may have been no sound, which is kind of ironic since this show was about sound, is that the character, which I'll jump to here, that I created by using some of the background sound from Donnie Darko, is supposed to appear behind you. And the sad thing is it actually appears off to your left, which is obviously not where he's at. So I need to work on that. But getting back to this little, there we go, this tutorial, it pretty much works as specified, but you're going to have to do a lot of work because the actual visualization process of seeing where your audio channels are is less than desirable. But if you're a Premiere user or don't want to go spend money on the audio product that I mentioned, or the DAW last week, which was Reaper, then you might want to stick with Premiere. The other sad thing is that this thing only does a first order, whereas if you're using Reaper or the visualization tools from Facebook, you can actually do a third order and actually bring in I think up to 16 channels, if I remember correctly, a lot more than what you can in Premiere. But this might be a good place to start if you're very familiar with Premiere. You can follow the tutorial here. And like I said, I did have some issues on where the actual sound was actually presented in the video. Plus the fact is I had some issues in creating the actual output. I could only use, as they show here, QuickTime, and then because I had a 3840 by 19, was it 20, 2-to-1 ratio, I had some issues with be able to compress it using MP4, so I had to create an uncompressed version, which can be horrendously large. So what I did was actually go back and use the Facebook encoder by bringing in a separate audio and video channel. So if you're interested in doing this, it's well worth looking into. And the big reason that I'm talking about this, as well as the Facebook, is that if you have the Zoom H2n, and I'm going to bring that up here in a second. Let me actually go to my main camera. That's this little unit here. Now, if you remember last week, I mentioned to Chris that I was going to, let me bring this in front of it, create a case that enveloped the Zoom H2n. And as you can see here, it still provides access to controls. However, I do need to, because the rim is around the upper part, it actually occludes the or hides the menu scrolling key. So I'm going to have to figure out, maybe put a notch in there so that you still have access to it. You can remove it, but it's still, as you can see there, you still have some access issues with that. The other thing that I found is, because I made the upper part of it flat, if you put the 360 camera, which I now have on this the selfie stick here, directly to it, the base shows. And so what I'll do is I'll redesign a version of this so that it slopes up gradually and will be less apparent in the video. But in my case, it really worked out well, because as you can see here, I put a selfie stick on it, and then on the bottom I found on Amazon, and I'll put all these in the show notes, a tripod base that fits onto the bottom, and then you mount the actual H2n inside of it with another screw, and they're all basically 1/4 inch camera sockets or screws. And then essentially it allows you to support it with the stick. On top of that, I put the Gear 360, and this prevented the actual stick, other than the tripod base on the bottom, from being seen. So I actually liked doing it this way better. So I will have the 3D files for both this head, or excuse me, top portion that you can mount the stick to, or a more gradually sloping top lid so that you can run the Gear 360 directly on top of it and have less issues with seeing the unit below it. So why did I do this? Because I wanted a fully self-contained unit that allowed me to capture 360 audio and be able to take it with me and then place it somewhere and then allow me to record the sound. Now, if you noticed here, I have access to the record button, so you can trigger that. If you're familiar with the Gear 360, if you've got a Samsung phone, and I guess, yeah, just a Samsung phone, you can control it remotely. And they also, I think, make a Bluetooth remote. So even if you don't have a phone, you can still control it. So you just set your audio going, and then using a clapboard or your hands to synchronize the audio so that you can then bring them together. I found that worked pretty well. and it does a pretty good job. Now, keep in mind, as some people have complained about it, the Zoom H2n, the way that it has its 4 mic array built into this, they actually are in a cross pattern, and they say because of their arrangement, it's not a true pattern that you would use to create proper spatial audio. I've heard, in fact, I think there's a Kickstarter that's starting up that's going to create a separate audio, what do you want to call it, condenser heads that can be replaced in this. I'm also hoping, I've got an H5n2, which is a removable top. I'm hoping Zoom themselves will create a head that works specifically for spatial sound, and then you just swap that in, and then you have the ability of running multiple mics from that as well. We'll see, but if you're not aware of it, the Zoom H2n is fairly low cost, less than $200. So if you want to get into spatial audio for little money, because of the other microphones, and you still need a multi-track recorder, and if you're going to be doing this out in the field, you're going to need a multi-track recorder that's mobile. So you're still looking at spending, I think some of them are like $1,600 all the way up to $3,500 for the microphone, and then at least $300 to $400 for a 4-track recorder to record those tracks from your microphone. So this is easily a low-cost version, and obviously you can use it for other things. If you're doing podcast, you could use it as a podcast microphone. So the other thing that I found was a problem, and let's see if I can if you hold it from the stick here, the way that I designed this was to slide in and snap, and I found that even though it does do a good job of keeping it in place, the groove there can come loose. So I'm using right now nylon straps that can be removed, but I'm going to design a little what do you want to call it, snap clamps onto the side here so that they snap onto it to keep it in place, and then you can snap them off, and then they're hinged so they'll just fall back, and that way you can remove it and actually pull out your unit to replace the battery. I would recommend getting a larger SD card for it, and making sure you have a full charge so that you don't have to pull it in and out. It's not that difficult, but once you have it in place, obviously you're not wanting to want to remove it in and out on a regular basis. But the good thing is the batteries keep this thing charged for hours, and with a large enough SD card, that won't be an issue as well. So I'm looking forward to doing even more tests later on. Okay, so let's see what else I've got. Oh, the other thing I wanted to cover is the Samsung GearVR 360. I like the ergonomics of it. I've used it a few times. It's very similar to the Google controller, but I like the ergonomics a little bit better. I like the fact is the volume control is right in front here instead of off to the side. The buttons, I just think the whole unit is a little bit better designed. It obviously is made a little bit more ergonomically to fit in your hand. I find myself always dropping the Google VR controller, not to be the case here. I did notice in setting it up, it did require a little bit of time, but I found that a number of the apps immediately start working with this. And just like the Google controller, you literally point it is essentially a 3 degrees of freedom on an axis with a, what do you want to call it, a skeleton armature for your arm to give you the illusion that your arm, when you move it, is actually jointed. It works pretty good, and highly recommend it. The other cool thing is you can buy that separately. I think it's about $39, unlike the Google Daydream. But I did find a clone of the Google Daydream controller, which I'll be talking about next week. I should have my my version that I ordered directly from the company coming in next week. Okay, well, that's about it, I think. Let's see what else. No, I think that's about it. So on that note, very fast episode today, and it appears that if you're wondering why it's somewhat disjointed, the reason for that is I did not have any feedback, and it appears that I did not have any audio when I started the show. So that's why we're going immediately into my little section and not seeing much news items. Also, the fact is that Chris couldn't make it today. So on that note, I'm going to bring down my audio and I'll play the little video that I started. Chris? Just thought I'd take you back into our little wilderness here. But you know, it's kind of a little bit of a downer today. I guess you probably heard the news yesterday about, what's his name? President Trump, about pulling out of the Paris Accord. Well, I don't know your opinion about that, but you know, I think there was some
6 hours,
some meaning to
42
what was the
minutes,
word?
12
Confefe?
seconds.
Oh, what did you say, Frank?
That is when the world will